This is Trevor Benko, CEO of TGB Supplements.
And this is Ben Jordan.
And today we're going to do a video talking about Primobolan. This is a classic steroid that's been around for a long time. We've had a few requests on our channel to do a little overview on Primobolan. So we're going to kick it off today. We're going to talk about Methenolone Enanthate and Acetate. Now, the acetate is primarily found in the oral version of Primobolan, but there is also an acetate version of the injectable, which is very painful and very, very rare, very hard to find nowadays. Usually underground labs that make these types of preparations. Typically the one that you'll find is the Methenolone Enanthate, which is very common as far as a form of Primobolan, but it's still very difficult to find true Primobolan. It's very rare. It's only made, I believe, in Turkey and Spain now.
Yep, they're bare.
Yeah, so they've stopped most of the production.
Yep, and they're in ampules as well, so you're not going to find any pharmaceutical Primo in a vial.
Yeah, I mean there are some out there in the vial, but they're probably not, you know, legitimate pharmaceutical. I mean, I think Alpha Pharma was one that has a vial and an ampule, and the quality is supposed to be pretty good with them. But I'm not sure, you know, how true that is compared to like a Bayer, you know, or shearing, of course. So, you know, getting into this compound, it's very low androgenic capacity. It's like, I believe it's a 44 or 57. The anabolic rating is around 88, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, it is definitely more anabolic than androgenic, which is why people tend to like this compound. They say that it has low side effects. That's because of that rating. Now, go ahead. Oh, keeping that in mind with testosterone, which is a 100 anabolic to 100 androgenic.
Yeah, one of the things with Primo, it's kind of a misconception, or it gets like a bad aura about, is, oh, Primo's weak, blah, blah, blah. Well, the problem, or I guess it'd be a problem, is it's 100 milligrams per milliliter. To do an appreciable amount of Primo to get a fairly good effect, you might need 600, 700, 800 milligrams of it, and that runs into the problem with people of, that's 8 milliliters of oil. So one, like we said, Primo being one of the most commonly faked compounds, it's very expensive. That's why. So that's not really cost effective or conducive for a lot of people for what they have to, lack of a better way to put into using the Primo with the amount of oils for what they would give out of it. They might use like an equipoise or something like that to give them a pretty similar effect.
Yeah, the anabolic effect of Primobolan is actually very close to that of Decadorobolan. So it's very similar to an androlone as far as the anabolic effect, milligram to milligram. So, you know, if you're running, you know, 400 or 500 milligrams of Deca, you would get a similar anabolic effect with, you know, 500 milligrams of Primobolan on paper, at least.
Yeah, one of the benefits of Primo is the insanely high nitrogen retention quality. So that's where this kind of shines, is in a big caloric deficit. Some guys claim they can still build a few pounds of lean tissue while they're at a low caloric deficit to burn a lot of fat off.
Yeah, Primobolan is mainly used during cutting phases just because it is not very anabolic and it's not androgenic very much, so it shines the most when you're eating clean. And like Ben said, the biggest issue is just using it in the doses needed to provide those, you know, better results. A lot of people just don't either have the money or don't want to inject that much oil.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could use, like Trevor was saying, 400 milligrams of Deca. You could put some substantial weight on. Some of it's going to be water retention. Compared to 400 milligrams of Primo, you're going to see more solid gains. It's just not going to be as fast or as pronounced as what you would get.
Yeah, kind of getting into the history of Primobolan. It came about, I believe, in 1960 was when it was first described, first used. I believe it was the enanthate was the first one that they introduced as far as the injectable form. And the enanthate ester is typically like a 2-week half-life. But, you know, to keep it stable in your blood, you'd probably have to inject it at least once every 5 days, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, using the enanthate, I'd probably do it every 3.5, 4 days.
Yeah, you're going to be really a lot more stable that way. The longest you could probably go would be like a 5-day period.
So if you was going to say run 600 mgs, you could do 300 twice a week.
And honestly, with it being such a difficult oil, that it's a thicker oil, it's a more painful oil, that's why you can only hold 100 milligrams per milliliter. You really would rather do, you know, it every other day or something like that, and keep it more frequent. Yep. And use lower doses each time, you know, or use 3 milliliters 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Get better if you're just using Primobolan if you want that effect.
Yeah, you could do 2, 2, and 2, so lower oil volume. You're not going to feel as much, because like Trevor was saying, it does have a little bit of a bite.
Yeah, especially if you were to ever use the acetate form. I mean, it is very, very painful as an injectable. Now, the oral acetate is very mild and it's pretty weak for men, but it has some great effects in women if it is true Primobolan. That's the thing. A lot of times that's very commonly faked. It's even more common to fake that than the enanthate form. So it's very, very rare to find true Primobolan acetate pharmaceutical grade tablets. You can find them on the underground market, of course, the black market, but the quality is questionable, and if it was for a woman, I wouldn't want to take that risk.
Yeah, and that's even the thing. There might actually be real Primo in there, but say it's claiming 100 milligrams, let's say the depot, 100 milligrams, you might only get, say, 67. They could kind of undercut it, and there's really no way of knowing unless you would do the testing to go that deep into it. You could even use like a Royd test, and it would show that there's Primobolan in there. You just don't know how much.
In medical use, the Primobolan was always used pretty much for muscle wasting disorders, any kind of degenerative disease, aggressive disease that could cause loss of muscle. That's usually when they use Primobolan as a prescription drug. So that's just getting into some of the more basic uses.
Yep, that's where its claim to fame is, and it shines, is in that caloric deficit, the anti-catabolic effect, and the nutrient
preventing breakdown,
nutrient repartitioning. So you're able to lose less muscle tissue in a low caloric environment, plus be able to retain a lot more nitrogen inside the muscle. Yeah,
another thing about Primobolan is it doesn't aromatize. It's not something that you're going to have estrogenic negative side effects from. And it builds very quality lean muscle. So the muscle that you do put on is usually very well maintained, and you don't end up losing a lot of it. And you also don't have to use as many other drugs to combat those side effects because of the no estrogen conversion or aromatization. So moving on, I would say dosing wise, you're probably looking at to have real world results. I mean, I wouldn't go any lower for muscle building effects myself. 300 milligrams is usually the bare minimum. You probably aren't going to notice much there, to be honest with you. But I've done 200 milligrams of replacement testosterone with 300 milligrams of Primobolan, had very good clean gains, no side effects whatsoever. I mean, it's nothing crazy, but you can put on slow quality muscle and have very little impact or negative effect on the body as far as blood work is concerned. But I mean, guys do go much higher, contest prep all the way up to 1,000 milligrams. Even more than that, I'm sure. But most of the time, guys would rather use other compounds. If they're going to run those types of doses, you're better off when you can get a 200 or 300 milligrams per milliliter, which you'll never have with Primobolan. The most you'll ever find is 100. If you get any more than that, you're going to have it either falling out of solution, or it's going to be extremely painful, or they're going to be having to use solvents to keep it in the oils. The molecular weight's very high. I believe it's 414. So it's a pretty heavy molecule to begin with, so it doesn't stay in solution very well, which is why the lower dose per milliliter. Things to keep in mind, the Primobolan acetate is not a 17-alpha alkylated steroid. It is an acetate attachment, so it does have a little bit, it does prevent hepatic breakdown slightly, but it's not going to be nearly as potent as a 17-alpha alkylated steroid, especially for men. Men would have to use probably a couple hundred milligrams a day to get effects just from that, and you're going to be getting some other effects, along with that when you take it orally. Your body's going to break it down into other things, and you're not going to get the same effect as the injectable.
So this is one of the very few unmethylated anabolics that can provide a decent effect.
Yeah, very mild effect for men, but for women it can have a decent effect, and very little impact on the liver. But of course, the higher you go in the dose, to have those types of effects, you probably will get a little more breakdown, which would cause a little elevation in liver enzymes, I would assume. As far as the injectable form, like we had said, it is a little bit painful. Typically, I like to run compounds for about 8 weeks, and usually take a break or switch to something else. I just feel like your body kind of adapts, and you get the most out of it during those first 8 weeks, and then you kind of hit a wall, or you have to up the dose.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mystique on it, like we were saying about it being commonly faked. If somebody has put out, say, a bad review on it, or it didn't do what it was supposed to, I mean, how do they know that it was real Primobolan? You know what I mean? I'm sure there is people that has had a test, and maybe they just didn't respond as well to it. But I'd say a majority of the people that didn't get a effect that they was looking for from it, it probably isn't actual Primobolan.
Yeah, and you know, another thing, this is one of those compounds that you may want to actually purchase a roid test and test the oil or test the powder to make sure that it is Primobolan, because this is one that is commonly replaced with testosterone, a mild nandrolone, you know, other compounds that are cheaper and, you know, not going to cost as much to produce. You probably won't notice the difference, you know, just from use. Most people just couldn't tell. You know, as long as they're slow, consistent gains, you're going to think it's Primobolan pretty much.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people, they probably won't delve into it, is because of the risk of it being faked, plus the cost. You know what I mean? They could run an equipoise at a decent dose and get the same effects almost.
Yeah, exactly. Side effect wise, you know, with Primobolan, they are pretty mild, but the higher the dose, you're going to have more chance of side effects. One of the things that you would have to look out for is your cholesterol, and that's pretty much any steroid, especially those that don't aromatize. They are notorious for lowering your HDL, which is your good cholesterol, and increasing the LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. So long term, that could lead to heart disease. Now, if you keep the doses low and moderate, you're not going to have much of that effect. But the higher you go, obviously, the more the effect will be. We already talked about the liver with the injectable, little to no impact on the liver. The oral, maybe a slight impact, but very, very little compared to other methylated compounds. Cardiovascular strain overall, I'd say, is pretty mild for the most part, just because this is a milder steroid.
Again, that's dose related.
Suppression of testosterone, that's something that you will have. There's been people that would say that, you know, that with Primobolan it's not very suppressive, but anything that's going to build muscle is going to be suppressive. And I definitely would say you're going to need a post-cycle if you're not on testosterone replacement, so that's something to keep in mind.
And that's a common myth, guy. You're just a little bit suppressed. No, you're either suppressed or you're not.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, even at a very low, moderate dose of 100 or 200 milligrams, you're probably going to have some type of testosterone suppression, but it should be less than like a nandrolone, for example. But obviously, the higher you go, the more you're going to have. Side effect wise, anything else come to mind?
No, I mean, for a DHT based compound like the acne and the common effects that you might
oily
get from
skin.
say a Masteron, it's not commonly seen with the Primobolan.
Yeah, you may get some oily skin, but it's less likely.
Yep. And that's the thing, everybody reacts differently, so everybody's body physiology is different. So the exception is always the rule, kind of. There's things that you're probably not going to see, but if you do see it, it's not an improbable thing.
Just kind of hitting back on the dosing again real quick. We're going to try to wrap this up so we don't start talking in circles. But you know, typically in pharmaceutical world, it was prescribed at 100 to 200 milligrams per week, and then it would be maintained at around 100 milligrams per week. Bodybuilders tend to use anywhere from 200 to 400 on the mild side, and like we had said before, some guys go even up into excesses of 1,000 milligrams. But you know, you're going to have more chance of those oily skin, those types of side effects, negative impact on the lipids, and so on at those higher doses. A lot of guys use it in combination with other compounds towards the end of getting ready for a bodybuilding prep. Halate testing, Winstrol, these are things not together, but usually one of those, one or the other. Masteron, another one that's very common. It can be used, you know, in a bulking or cutting, really, but like we said, most of the time it's usually cutting, so you'll find it with these more DHT based hardening agents.
Yeah, that's kind of like I said earlier, the claim to fame to it is being able to promote very high nitrogen retention and an anti-catabolic environment. You can get the same muscle building effect or a little bit better muscle building effect of, say, an equipoise or a DECA. So if you were bulking, there's probably a better option for you. But cutting, that's where it kind of shines above the others.
Yeah. Now for women, normal dosing, I'd say, is somewhere between 50 to 100 milligrams per week. Women usually tend to go with the oral version if it's available, just because it's a little easier to control and keep the dose more stable, and it's out of your system faster, so it's not going to be in there if something does end up causing issues, it's something that you can actually change pretty quick. But you just want to make sure that you would definitely test that beforehand, before just taking it, just in case it was something else. Any steroid, obviously, for women, it's a lot more risk, so it's not something we recommend. Obviously, none of this is medical advice. This is just our opinion, but something to think about before you start taking steroids. That there's a lot of side effects that could come down the road that you don't think about. As far as availability, this is a rare compound, so it's going to be harder to find. It's going to be more expensive, and I would be more leery of underground labs with a compound like this. Something to definitely look, take your time with. Overall, I mean, anything else you want to mention?
I think key notes for you guys. It's a DHT-based compound, so it's all lean, dry gains, no water retention. It's pretty mild on your health profile, dose depending, obviously. It stacks well with about anything. Very good anti-catabolic environment, so it'll keep more nitrogen in your muscles, so you'll be able to build a little bit of muscle in a caloric deficit and preserve a lot of your muscle tissue while you're dieting.
One other thing, Primobolan is more of an immunostimulant, so it can actually help boost the immune system, kind of like how testosterone does. Some steroids actually can take away from the immune system, and some actually help contribute and boost the immune function, and this is one. So that is another thing. That's why another reason why it's used sometimes with people that are fighting off infections or sick with muscle wasting disorders.
Yeah, I mean, negatives, cost, which that could or couldn't be a negative, but it is for most people.
Yeah.
Availability, commonly faked, the amount of milligrams per milliliter, and the amount of oil that you have to use at an appreciable dose to get a decent effect. That's pretty much the negatives with Primobolan.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. As far as the effects themselves, they're pretty desirable, honestly. I mean, most people, if you run it the right way, you will be happy with the effects, and you should have little side effects if done properly. I think that's about it. I mean, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that we didn't touch on, or you guys have any questions upon, you can put it in the notes below, and we can get back to you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to get back to you. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this. We'll be coming at you with some other compounds here in the near future, I'm sure. Check out the Anabolic Cartel podcast. We just posted up our 7th episode with Maud Giacchetti. We talk about a lot of good stuff there. I'm sure if you like these videos, you'll definitely like the podcast. All right, we'll see you next time.